They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say it's best served at exactly 98.6 degrees body temperature, delivered with a smile, so warm it could melt steel beams. My name is James Mitchell, and tonight I'm about to teach my daughter's new husband a lesson about the true value of a man. The invitation never came. Let that sink in for a moment. My only daughter, Elizabeth, the girl whose scraped knees I bandaged, whose nightmares I chased away, whose college tuition I paid in full, didn't invite me to her wedding. Not because I was dead, not because I was in prison, but because your Wall Street prince, Cedric Blackstone, deemed me too ordinary. I really hate him. If you feel like this story might reach you somehow, follow the channel. That way, you help me bring more stories like this, and we grow with every life we learn from. Dad's just a state engineer. I heard her tell someone at the engagement party 6 months ago. Her voice carrying that apologetic tone children develop when they're ashamed of where they come from. He works for the Department of Transportation. You know, roads and bridges and stuff. Roads and bridges and stuff. If only she knew that those roads and bridges had paved my way to a fortune that would make her precious Cedric's portfolio look like a child's piggy bank. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The beauty of this story isn't in the money. It's in the moment when arrogance meets its match. I'm standing outside the Blackstone estate right now, watching through the tall windows as my daughter dances with her new husband. The September air carries the sound of champagne toasts and hollow laughter. 500 guests, I counted. 499 of them more important than the man who gave the bride life, apparently. The security guard at the gate didn't even question me when I walked up. Why would he? I look exactly like when I'm a middle-aged government employee in a 15-year-old suit. The kind of man who becomes invisible in rooms full of people who measure worth in stock options and summer homes. The kind of man Cedric Blackstone III wouldn't waste his breath acknowledging. That's about to change. 6 months earlier, I sat across from Cedric at Del Frisco's, the kind of steakhouse where they don't put prices on the menu, because if you have to ask, you don't belong. He'd insisted on this man-to-man dinner, though I suspected it was less about bonding and more about establishing dominance. So, James, he said, cutting into his wagyu with surgical precision, Elizabeth tells me you work for the state. Department of Transportation, I replied, noting how his eyes had already begun to glaze over. Senior infrastructure engineer, 28 years. He made a sound not quite a laugh, more like the noise someone makes when they're trying not to yawn. That must be ... stable. Stable. The way he said it, you'd think stability was a disease. It has its advantages, I said, taking a sip of the wine he'd ordered without asking my preference. A 2015 Chateau Margaux, $3,000 a bottle. He wanted me to be impressed. I'm sure it does, Cedric said, his tone suggesting he couldn't imagine what those advantages might be. Elizabeth's very grounded. I suppose that comes from her upbringing. Grounded. Another word that sounded like an insult in his mouth. Tell me, James, he continued, leaning back in his chair like a king holding court, have you given any thought to retirement? I mean, at your age, with a state pension, you could probably manage a modest lifestyle. Maybe move somewhere ... quieter. Florida, perhaps. I know a guy who could get you a deal on a condo. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. I smiled. The kind of smile I'd perfected over decades of sitting through meetings with people who thought they were smarter than everyone else in the room. That's thoughtful of you, Cedric. Well, we're going to be family, he said, though his expression suggested he was already calculating how to minimize that particular obligation. Speaking of which, about the wedding ... double quotes, here it came. Elizabeth and I have been discussing the guest list. You understand, of course, that my family has certain expectations. The Blackstones have been prominent in New York society for 4 generations. The wedding will be covered by Town and Country, possibly Vogue. There will be senators there, CEOs, people who move in very particular circles. I see. I knew you would. He smiled, all 32 perfectly veneered teeth gleaming. So you'll understand why we need to be selective about the narrative. Elizabeth's story is quite compelling, rising from humble beginnings to marry into one of Manhattan's most established families. It's very American dream, very aspirational. But that story works better if we keep certain elements abstract. Elements like her father. He had the decency to look uncomfortable for exactly 3 seconds. I wouldn't put it quite so bluntly, but yes, your presence might confuse the narrative. These people, James, they can be judgmental. One wrong conversation about government pay scales or municipal bonds, and suddenly Elizabeth becomes that girl instead of the brilliant attorney we want them to see. And Elizabeth agrees with this? She understands the realities of the world she's entering. Sacrifices have to be made. I'm sure you understand. You're a practical man. A practical man. If only he knew how practical I could be. Besides, Cedric added, sliding a check across the table, we want to make this easier. Consider this a wedding gift from us to you. Enough for that Florida condo. Maybe a nice vacation. You deserve it after all those years of service. The check was for $50,000. To him, it was pocket change. To him, it was the price of making an inconvenient father-in-law disappear. I picked up the check, studied it for a moment, then folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. That's very generous, Cedric. He relaxed visibly, probably congratulating himself on how well he'd handled the situation. The poor state employee had been bought off without a fuss. Transaction complete. I knew you'd be reasonable, he said, signaling for the check. Elizabeth was worried you might be upset, but I told her, your father's a smart man. He knows how the world works. Oh, I knew exactly how the world worked. I'd known since before this trust fund baby was even born. Fortune, what Cedric Blackstone III didn't know, what my own daughter didn't fully grasp, was that I'd been playing a longer game than any of them could imagine. 28 years ago, I started as a junior engineer with the state DOT. The salary was nothing special, $32,000 a year, but the position gave me something far more valuable: information. Every infrastructure project, every highway expansion, every new interchange or rail extension crossed my desk years before the public knew anything about it. The first investment was almost an accident. I'd been reviewing plans for a new highway exit in what was then farmland, 40 miles outside the city. The land was selling for $800 an acre. I scraped together everything I had, took out a loan against my pension, and bought 20 acres. My wife, God rest her soul, thought I'd lost my mind. 5 years later, when the exit was built and the area was rezoned for commercial development, I sold that land for 50 times what I'd paid for it. That was just the beginning. Over the years, I learned to read the patterns, to see the future in planning documents and feasibility studies. When the state was considering a new tech corridor, I was buying property along the proposed route 2 years before the announcement. When environmental impact studies suggested a new water treatment facility would be needed in a growing suburb, I was already investing in the construction companies that would likely get the contracts. But I was careful, always careful. I formed LLCs with boring names like Municipal Investment Holdings and Infrastructure Development Partners. I lived in the same modest house, drove the same 10-year-old Toyota, wore the same off-the-rack suits. To the world, I was just another government lifer, counting down to his pension. The truth? By the time Cedric was insulting me over Wagyu beef, I was worth approximately $320 million. Not bad for roads and bridges and stuff. Elizabeth called me in the morning after our dinner with Cedric. I could hear the rehearsed quality in her voice, like she was reading from a script he'd written for her. Dad, about the wedding ... You don't want me there. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. It's not that I don't want you there, she said finally. It's just ... Complicated. Cedric's family, they have expectations. And you know how you are at these things. You get uncomfortable around those people. Those people, you know what I mean. The networking, the small talk about investments and vacation homes. It's not your world, Dad. And you think it's yours? It is now, she said, and there was a hardness in her voice I'd never heard before. I've worked for this, Dad. I deserve this. You can't have your state employee father embarrassing you in front of the Blackstones. That's not what I was going to say, but it's what you meant. Another silence. I could hear her breathing, could picture her in her Manhattan apartment, the one I'd co-signed for, though she'd stopped mentioning that particular detail at dinner parties. "Cedric's offering you money," she said. "Enough to... I know what he's offering. Then you understand. This is best for everyone. You get to retire comfortably, and I get to start my new life without complications. Complications. That's what a father becomes when his daughter decides she's outgrown him. If that's what you want, Elizabeth." "It is," she said, too quickly. "It's what's best." After she hung up, I sat in my home office, the one room in my house that might have given away my secret, with its bank of monitors displaying real-time market data and the abstract, expressionist painting on the wall that had cost more than Cedric's monthly draw. And I made a decision. They wanted me to disappear? Fine. But I'd do it on my own terms. One of the advantages of being invisible is that people don't guard their secrets around you. Over the next few months, as wedding preparations consumed Elizabeth's life, I did what I did best. I researched. Cedric Blackstone III was exactly what he appeared to be, a third-generation Wall Street prince, living off the fumes of his family's diminishing fortune. His grandfather had built the Blackstone wealth through steel and railroads. His father had maintained it through conservative investments and political connections. But Cedric was burning through it like a wildfire through dry brush. His hedge fund, Blackstone Capital Management, was hemorrhaging money. They'd hidden it well creative accounting, offshore shells, a continuous shuffle of assets that created the illusion of prosperity, but the foundation was rotting. I found the cracks in their financial statements, the patterns in their trades that suggested something worse than incompetence: fraud. The interesting part? One of their biggest investors was the New York State Pension Fund, the same pension fund that managed retirement accounts for state employees. Like me, the irony was delicious. But the real discovery came when I was reviewing property records for the Blackstone estate, the family's crown jewel where the wedding would be held. The 100-acre compound in the Hamptons, with its mansion, guest houses, and private beach, wasn't actually owned by the Blackstones anymore. They'd sold it 3 years ago to cover debts, then leased it back to maintain appearances. The buyer? A holding company called Cornerstone Properties, LLC. Guess who owned Cornerstone Properties, LLC? That's right, the invisible man. The nobody. The state employee who wasn't good enough to attend his own daughter's wedding. I'd bought it through 3 layers of shell companies, part of a larger portfolio acquisition. I hadn't even realized it was the Blackstone estate until I started investigating. The universe, it seems, has a sense of humor. Standing outside the estate that night, watching my daughter's wedding through windows I technically owned, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is for people who've been surprised by betrayal. I'd moved past anger into something colder, more precise. The plan had formed slowly, like sediment settling into rock. I wouldn't crash the wedding that would be crass, expected. No, I'd wait for the perfect moment. The moment when Cedric felt most secure, most superior. Then I'd teach him a lesson about the danger of underestimating people based on their job titles. The valet didn't even look at me as I handed him the keys to my rented Tesla. I'd left the Toyota at home, a small concession to the evening's requirements. The invitation check at the door was perfunctory. I'd added my name to the list through a connection at the catering company. Money might not buy love, but it certainly buys access. The ballroom was exactly what you'd expect from new money trying to look like old money. Too much gold, too many flowers, too much of everything. I took a champagne flute from a passing server and found a spot near the back, just another gray-suited nobody in a sea of somebodies. Elizabeth looked beautiful. That was the hardest part. Seeing her in the dress I should have walked her down the aisle in, watching her smile at jokes told by people who would forget her name the moment she stopped being useful. She looked happy, but it was a brittle happiness, like sponge sugar that would dissolve at the first touch of rain. The speeches began after dinner. Cedric's best man, a walking Brooks Brothers catalog named Preston, told stories about their prep school days that were probably hilarious if you'd been there and had a trust fund. Elizabeth's maid of honor, her law school roommate, gave a carefully edited version of their friendship that excluded any mention of Elizabeth's background. Then Cedric took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cedric began, his voice carrying that particular confidence that comes from never having been truly tested. Thank you all for being here to celebrate this incredible day. Polite applause rippled through the room like a shallow wave. When I first met Elizabeth, he continued, I knew she was special. Here was a woman who had pulled herself up from nothing, and I mean truly nothing, to become one of the most brilliant legal minds of her generation. From nothing, I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles burn against my throat. She didn't have the advantages many of us in this room had, Cedric went on, warming to his theme. No family connections, no inherited wealth, no doors opened by a last name. Her father. He paused, and I saw him scan the room, perhaps checking to make sure I hadn't somehow materialized. Her father was a simple civil servant. A good man, I'm sure, but limited by his circumstances and, let's be honest, his ambitions. The fact that Elizabeth rose above that humble beginning to stand here today, as my wife, as a Blackstone, is a testament to her extraordinary character. The room murmured its approval. Several people actually applauded. Elizabeth stood beside him, her smile fixed, her eyes carefully avoiding the back of the room where she must have suspected I'd be. The Blackstone family, Cedric continued, has always believed in excellence, in achievement, in the pursuit of greatness. We don't settle for mediocrity. We don't accept good enough. And in Elizabeth, I found someone who shares those values. Someone who refused to let her background define her limitations. He raised his glass. So here's to my beautiful wife, who proved that in America, with enough determination, anyone can transcend their origins. Here's to leaving the past behind and embracing a future worthy of the Blackstone name. The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked. Elizabeth kissed him, and the photographer's flash captured their perfect moment. That's when I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. There's something about a single person standing still in a room full of movement that draws the eye. One by one, heads turned. The applause faltered, then died. That was a beautiful speech, Cedric, I said, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. Really moving, especially the part about humble beginnings. Elizabeth's face went white. Dad? Hello, sweetheart. Don't worry, I'm not staying. I know I'm not on the guest list. I just wanted to drop off a wedding present. Cedric's jaw tightened. Mr. Mitchell, this is highly inappropriate. James, please, I interrupted. After all, we're family now, and family should be honest with each other, don't you think? I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. Not dramatically. I wasn't going for theater. Just a simple white envelope, the kind you might use to pay a utility bill. Since you're so interested in humble beginnings and spectacular rises, Cedric, I thought you might enjoy this story. It's about a simple civil servant who spent 28 years working for the Department of Transportation. Boring work, really. Roads and bridges and stuff. A nervous titter ran through the crowd. Elizabeth looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. This civil servant, I continued, walking slowly toward the head table, had access to something valuable. Not money. His salary was, as you so eloquently put it, limited. But information. Every infrastructure project, every development plan, every zoning change crossed his desk years before public announcement. Cedric's face was beginning to change color. He knew where this was going. So this simple, unambitious man started making investments. Small at first, a few acres here, a strip mall there. Always through holding companies, always carefully structured. Do you know what compound interest looks like over 28 years, Cedric? The room was dead silent now. But here's the really interesting part, I said, now standing directly in front of the head table. This boring civil servant didn't just invest in real estate. He also paid attention to state contracts, to which companies were likely to get billion-dollar infrastructure deals. He invested in those companies. Sometimes he even bought controlling interests. I set the envelope on the table in front of Cedric. Like Cornerstone Properties, LLC, which acquired some distressed assets a few years ago, including, coincidentally, this beautiful estate. Cedric's face went from red to white in the span of a heartbeat. That's right, I said, smiling that same patient smile I'd given him at Del Frisco's. You're having your wedding reception in my house. While one of them, I have several. The murmur that ran through the crowd was like wind through wheat starting soft, building to a roar. But I wasn't done. There's more in that envelope, Cedric. See, when you insulted me over that very expensive dinner, You made a mistake. You assumed that because I was a state employee, I was powerless. But state employees have access to interesting things, like audit triggers, like investigation protocols, like the knowledge of which regulatory bodies to notify when they notice unusual patterns in hedge fund trading. His hand trembled as he reached for the envelope. The New York State Pension Fund invested $40 million with Blackstone Capital Management last year, I continued. That makes it my business, both as a state employee and as someone with a vested interest in pension fund performance. So I did what any concerned citizen would do. I looked closer. You can't prove anything, Cedric said, but his voice cracked like ice in warm water. Prove? I pulled out my phone, showing him an email timestamp. I don't need to prove anything. This investigator I had lunch with last week, lovely woman. By the way, very thorough she handled approving. The email went out about ... Oh, 20 minutes ago? Right about the time you were giving your speech about excellence and achievement. The blood drained from his face completely. Around us, his Wall Street friends were already backing away. That particular social distancing that happens when someone becomes radioactive. But that's not even the best part, I said, turning to address the room. The best part is that Blackstone, Capital's largest private investor, through a series of shell companies that I'm sure Cedric never bothered to trace, is Municipal Investment Holdings, my company, which means, technically, Cedric works for me. Someone dropped a champagne glass. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Or he did, I amended. I liquidated my position this morning. The sell-off should hit the markets right about ... now. Phones started buzzing around the room. The weekend traders, the ones who lived and died by after-hours alerts, were already checking their screens. The murmur turned to gasps. Blackstone Capital just lost 60% of its value, someone whispered. Trading suspended, another voice added. SEC investigation announced ... double quote. Elizabeth stood up, her wedding dress rustling like autumn leaves. Dad, how could you? How could I? For the first time, I let emotion creep into my voice. How could I what, Elizabeth? Defend myself? Refuse to be erased from your life because your new husband found me embarrassing? You're ruining my wedding. No, sweetheart. Your wedding was ruined the moment you decided I wasn't good enough to attend it. I'm just returning the favor. Cedric found his voice, though it sounded strangled. This is illegal. Market manipulation, insider trading. Insider trading? I laughed, actually laughed. I'm a state employee with public information and personal investments. Everything I did was legal, documented, and above board. You, on the other hand, have been running a pyramid scheme with pension funds. Who do you think the FBI is going to be more interested in? As if on cue, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and went even paler, if that was possible. You should probably take that, I suggested. Your lawyer's going to be very busy for the next few years. The room was in chaos now. Half the guests were on their phones, either checking their portfolios or calling their lawyers. The other half were edging toward the exits, that particular Manhattan shuffle that happens when scandal breaks. You've destroyed everything, Elizabeth said, tears streaming down her face. My marriage, my future. No, I said, and for the first time all evening, I let her see the hurt beneath the calm. You destroyed our relationship the moment you decided I was something to be ashamed of. I just showed you what shame really looks like. I turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Elizabeth? That trust fund Cedric told you about? The one that would secure your future? It's gone. Has been for years. The only reason the Blackstones could afford this wedding was the check I didn't cash, the one he tried to buy my absence with. I hope it was worth it. The walk to the door felt like miles. Every step echoed in the silent ballroom. 500 of New York's elite, and not one of them said a word as the nobody, the state employee, the embarrassment walked past. At the door, I turned back one last time. Elizabeth was sobbing into Cedric's shoulder, but he wasn't comforting her. He was staring at his phone, watching his life disintegrate in real time. The photographer was still taking pictures, probably thinking this would win him a Pulitzer. One more thing, I called out. Elizabeth, there's a trust in your name. Your real name, not Blackstone. It's worth $50 million. and it becomes active on your 30th birthday or the day your marriage ends, whichever comes first. Consider it a wedding gift from your embarrassing father. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. The papers are with my lawyer, the same one who'll be handling the estate sale tomorrow. Yes, Cedric, you have 30 days to vacate. Standard lease terms. I walked out into the September night, breathing in air that smelled of salt and freedom. Behind me, I could hear the chaos building, voices raised, accusations flying, the sound of a carefully constructed world collapsing. The valet brought my Tesla around, still not making eye contact. I gave him $1,000 tip, just because I could. Rough night? He asked, surprised out of his professional invisibility. No, I said, sliding behind the wheel. Educational. As I drove away, I thought about Elizabeth. She'd learn, eventually, that there are different kinds of wealth. The kind Cedric offered, built on appearances and lies, and the kind I'd tried to give her, built on patience and planning. She'd chosen the former, but the trust would be waiting when she was ready for the latter. The call came 3 hours later. As I was sitting in my real home, not the modest ranch Elizabeth knew, but the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park that I'd bought 5 years ago and never told anyone about. Dad, her voice was small, broken. Hello, Elizabeth. Is it true? Everything you said? Which part? All of it. The money, the estate, Cedric's fraud. Yes. Silence stretched between us, but it was different from the silence of that morning months ago. This one was full of possibility. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know. Can you ever forgive me? I looked out at the city lights, thinking about forgiveness and time and the price of pride. The trust kicks in when your marriage ends, I said. Cedric will be charged by Monday. His assets will be frozen. You'll need a good divorce law. That's not what I asked. I know. Dad, please. I'm your father, Elizabeth. That doesn't stop just because you're ashamed of me. But forgiveness? That's going to take time. And maybe some honesty about who we really are. The woman at the party, the one you said you had lunch with, was she really sick? No, I admitted. She's FDA. We were actually discussing my investment in a biotech startup, but Cedric doesn't know that. The real SEC investigation won't start until Monday, when they notice the irregular patterns I've been documenting for 6 months. You've been planning this for 6 months? Since the day he offered to buy my absence from your life. She was quiet for a moment. The guests are all gone. Cedric's locked himself in the bathroom with his phone and what sounds like a bottle of scotch. I'm sitting in a wedding dress worth more than most people's cars, in a house you apparently own, wondering how I got everything so wrong. You fell in love with an idea, I said. The idea of who you could be if you just left your past behind. But the past has a way of following us, Elizabeth. The trick isn't to outrun it. It's to make peace with it. Very philosophical for a civil servant. Despite everything, I smiled. We simple folk have our moments. Dad? Yes? The trust $50 million, where did it all come from? Really? Roads and bridges, sweetheart. Roads and bridges and stuff. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was a circus. Media vans lined the street. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone in a suit, and somewhere in the mess, Cedric Blackstone III was about to learn his fate. I didn't attend the sentencing. I had no need to see him in an orange jumpsuit, no desire to watch his final humiliation. The newspapers would cover it extensively. They had been for months. The fall of Blackstone Capital had become the stuff of Wall Street legend, a cautionary tale about hubris and fraud that would be taught in business schools for decades. Elizabeth did attend. She sat in the back row, wearing a simple black dress and the kind of sunglasses people wear when they don't want to be recognized. She was thinner now, harder around the edges, but also somehow more real than she'd been in years. We met for coffee afterward at a small place near my office, my real office. Not the government building, but the suite in the financial district where I managed my various investments. 15 years, she said, setting down her cup with shaking hands. They gave him 15 years. It could have been worse. Or better, if he'd taken the plea deal. Cedric was never going to admit guilt. It's not in his DNA. She laughed, but it was bitter. No, I suppose not. He still thinks this is all a misunderstanding, that his family connections will somehow save him. How are you? She considered the question, really considered it. Broke, humiliated, divorced, unemployed. The firm suggested I take a leave of absence that we all know is permanent. She paused. Free? Free? For the first time in years, I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. I'm not apologizing for where I came from or trying to fit into a world that never wanted me anyway. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. The trust, I don't want it, she said quickly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need to figure out who I am without money defining me, either the lack of it or the excess of it. I nodded. That's probably wise. I got a job, she said, and there was something like pride in her voice. Legal aid, public defender's office. The pay is terrible. The hours are worse, and I'll be representing people the Blackstones would cross the street to avoid. Sounds perfect. It does, doesn't it? She smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. That night, at the wedding, was any of it spontaneous, or did you plan every word? I thought about it. The plan was to destroy Cedric. Everything else, the trust, the revelation about the estate, even showing up at all, that was improvisation. You could have destroyed him without humiliating me. Yes, I agreed. I could have. But you didn't. No. You needed to learn that actions have consequences, that you can't just erase people because they're inconvenient. It was a hard lesson, but necessary. And if I hadn't learned it, then the trust would have been waiting when you did. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cold from the coffee cup. I'm sorry, Dad. Not just for the wedding, but for all of it. For being ashamed of you, for buying into Cedric's worldview, for forgetting who I am and where I came from. I know. Is that enough? I squeezed her hand. It's a start. About wealth, we walked through Battery Park afterward, watching the Staten Island ferry come and go. The autumn sun was weak but warm, and the city hummed around us with its usual chaotic energy. Tell me about the money, Elizabeth said. The real story, not the abbreviated version you gave at the wedding. So I told her. About the first investment, about learning to read the city's growth patterns in planning documents and environmental assessments, about the holding companies and shell corporations, the careful dance of staying legal while maximizing opportunities. Weren't you ever tempted to go bigger? She asked. To leave the state job and become a full-time investor? Every day. But the job was my camouflage. As long as I was just another civil servant, nobody looked too closely at what I was doing. The minute I became a visible player, the game would change. And you liked being invisible. I liked being underestimated. There's power in being overlooked, Elizabeth. People show you who they really are when they think you don't matter. Like Cedric did. Like you did. She flinched but didn't argue. The thing about wealth, I continued, real wealth, not the kind Cedric pretended to have, is that it's not about the money. It's about options. The ability to choose your path without external pressure. The freedom to walk away from situations that don't serve you. Is that why you stayed in the state job? To maintain your options? Partly, but also because I liked the work. Those roads and bridges, they matter. They connect communities, enable commerce, let people visit their families. There's something honest about infrastructure. It either works or it doesn't. No pretense, no elaborate facades. Unlike Wall Street, unlike a lot of things. We stopped at a bench overlooking the harbor. The Statue of Liberty stood in the distance, green and stolid, a reminder of promises made and sometimes broken. What happens now? Elizabeth asked. What do you mean? With us. Are we going to have a relationship, or is this just closure? That depends on you. On me? I'll always be your father, Elizabeth. That's non-negotiable. But the kind of relationship we have, that's something you need to decide. I won't force my way into your life, but I won't be hidden away either. No more being ashamed of where you came from. I'm not. She started, then stopped. I suppose I am, still, a little. It's hard to break the habit. Habits can be broken. The question is whether you wanted to break them. She was quiet for a long moment, watching a tugboat push a barge up the Hudson. I want to try, she said finally. I want to know you, the real you, not the version I created in my head to justify my choices. I want to understand how you did what you did, not just the mechanics, but the why. The why is simple. I wanted security for my family. Everything else was just method. including destroying my wedding. That wasn't about security. That was about respect, and maybe a little bit about revenge. She laughed, surprising both of us. At least you're honest about it. I'm too old to be anything. 3 years have passed since that night at the Blackstone estate. The property sold at auction to a tech billionaire who turned it into a corporate retreat center. Cedric is serving his sentence in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania, teaching fellow inmates about financial markets. Ironic, considering he never really understood them himself. Elizabeth rebuilt her life piece by piece. The legal aid job led to a position with a nonprofit focused on housing rights. Then to her own practice, specializing in protecting elderly homeowners from predatory lending. She lives in Brooklyn now, in a modest apartment she pays for with her own earnings. The trust remains untouched, waiting. We have dinner once a month, always at unfashionable restaurants where the food is good and nobody cares who you are. She tells me about her cases, about the families she's helping stay in homes that developers want to demolish. I tell her about my investments, though now they're mostly in sustainable infrastructure and renewable energy projects. You're going soft, she teased me last week over a Korean barbecue in Flushing. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just investing in the future instead of exploiting the present. Very philosophical. I learned from the best. She raised an eyebrow. Who? Your mother. She always said the point of having money was to do good with it. I just took a while to understand what she meant. Elizabeth's eyes misted. We rarely talked about her mother, who died when Elizabeth was 15. Cancer doesn't care how much money you have or how well you plan. She would have hated what I became with Cedric, Elizabeth said. She would have understood it. People lose themselves sometimes. The important thing is finding your way back. Did you ever lose yourself? I thought about it. Once, right after your mother died, I threw myself into making money because I couldn't face the grief. It took me years to realize I was building a fortress instead of a future. And now I'm building bridges. Literally in some cases. I'm funding a new pedestrian bridge in the Bronx, connecting a low-income neighborhood to a commercial district. It's not profitable, but it's necessary. Mom would have liked that. I think so. The waiter brought our check. Elizabeth reached for it, but I was faster. My turn, I said. You always say that. Privilege of being the father. As we walked to the subway, she still took the train. Even though she could afford not to, she asked me the question I've been waiting 3 years to hear. Do you regret it? What you did at the wedding? Do you want the honest answer or the kind one? The honest one. Always the honest one. No, I don't regret it. Cedric was a parasite who would have destroyed you eventually. The wedding was just the catalyst. If I hadn't intervened, you would have wasted years trying to be someone you're not, only to end up broken when his house of cards collapsed. You could have warned me privately. Would you have listened? She considered this. No, I was too deep in the fantasy. Then you understand why I did what I did. I understand it. I'm not sure I forgive it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for understanding. Fair enough. At the subway entrance, she turned back. Dad, the story you told at the wedding about being worth $300 million, was that true? I smiled. Does it matter? I suppose not. But I'm curious. Let's just say the truth is usually more interesting than fiction. Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, Dad. The letter came on a Tuesday, delivered by courier to my government office. Yes, I still maintain a desk there, though I rarely use it. The return address was the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, Pennsylvania. Cedric's handwriting was still perfect, even after 3 years in prison. James, I know you won't respond to this letter, and I'm not asking you to. I'm writing because I need to say something, and maybe you need to hear it. I've had 3 years to think about that night. 3 years to replay every conversation, every slight, every moment of my spectacular arrogance. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the prison sentence or the financial ruin or even the social exile. It's knowing that you gave me every opportunity to see you for who you really were, and I was too blind to look. You sat across from me at Del Frisco's, drinking wine you probably knew more about than I did, and let me condescend to you about retirement condos in Florida. You must have been laughing inside, or maybe you were just sad. I prefer to think you were laughing. Elizabeth visits sometimes. She tells me about her work, about the people she helps. She's become everything I tried to prevent her from being: genuine, compassionate, grounded in reality instead of aspiration. She's also happier than she ever was with me. You probably knew that would happen too. I've been teaching finance classes here. My students are drug dealers and embezzlers, mostly. They're more honest about what they did than I ever was. One of them asked me yesterday why smart people do stupid things. I told him it's because we convince ourselves we're too smart to be stupid. He laughed and said, "Man, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard." He was right. I won't apologize for trying to exclude you from the wedding. We both know an apology would be meaningless now. But I will say this: you won. Not just in the obvious ways. The money, the revenge, the complete destruction of everything I built. You won because you knew something I'm only beginning to understand. Real power isn't about what you show the world. It's about what you know and when you choose to reveal it. There's a guard here, Henderson, who reminds me of you. He's quiet, competent, almost invisible. The other inmates dismiss him as just another government employee marking time until his pension. But I watch him, and I see the intelligence in his eyes, the way he observes everything while appearing to notice nothing. I wonder sometimes if he's playing a longer game than any of us realize. I have 12 more years to serve, assuming good behavior. By the time I get out, I'll be 53, the same age you were when you destroyed me. I wonder what I'll do with whatever life I have left. I wonder if I'll ever be able to build something real instead of just another facade. Elizabeth says you're funding infrastructure projects now, using your wealth to build actual bridges instead of burning them. She says you're still working for the state, still reviewing plans and permits, still invisible to everyone who doesn't know where to look. She says you seem happy. I hope that's true. Not because I wish you well. We both know that would be a lie, but because it means there's hope for the rest of us. If a man can spend 3 decades being underestimated and emerge not just victorious but purposeful, then maybe there's hope for someone who spent 3 decades overestimating himself. Don't visit. Don't write. Don't acknowledge this letter if we ever meet again. Just know that I understand now what you tried to teach me that night. The most dangerous man in the room is the one nobody notices until it's too late. Respectfully, and I mean that, Cedric Blackstone 3. I read the letter twice, then fed it into the shredder beside my desk. Outside my window, construction crews were working on a new overpass, the sound of progress drowning out the noise of traffic below. My phone buzzed. Elizabeth. Dinner Thursday? Usual place? Actually, I was thinking somewhere nicer. My treat. I just won a big case. Congratulations. What kind of case? Predatory lending. Saved 43 families from foreclosure. The developer was trying to force them out to build luxury condos. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Turns out I learned something from watching you after all. What's that? That the best revenge is patient, thorough, and completely legal. I smiled. That's my girl. Always was, Dad. I just forgot for a while. After we hung up, I turned back to my computer screen. The plans for the new bridge project glowed softly in the afternoon light. It would connect 2 neighborhoods that had been separated for 50 years, reuniting communities that urban planning had torn apart. The project manager had asked me why I was funding it. There was no profit in it, no tax advantage, no naming rights or public recognition. Because it needs to be built, I told him. That's it? That's everything. He looked at me the way people always looked at me, like I was simple, maybe a little naive, just another government employee with more heart than sense. I let him think that. After all, I'd built an empire on being underestimated. Why stop now? Epilogue. 10 years after, the call came at 3 in the morning, which is never good news at my age. But it wasn't the hospital or the police. It was Elizabeth. Dad, I'm at the hospital. My heart stopped. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect. You have a granddaughter. The drive to Mount Sinai took 20 minutes, though I have no memory of the route. I found Elizabeth in a private room, holding a bundle of pink blankets and exhaustion. Want to meet Sarah? She asked. Sarah? After Mom? I took my granddaughter carefully, this tiny perfect person who weighed less than a laptop computer. She had Elizabeth's nose and her mother's eyes, my late wife's eyes, and a grip that could crack walnuts. Where's the father? I asked. David's getting coffee. You'll like him. He's a teacher, public school, makes even less than I do. Sounds perfect. He is. He really is. No pretense, no family money, no expectations except that we love each other and raise this little one right, the way you were supposed to be raised. The way I was raised, Dad, I just lost sight of it for a while. David turned out to be exactly as advertised, a geometry teacher from Queens who looked at Elizabeth like she hung the moon and didn't care that I could buy the hospital we were sitting in. Elizabeth tells me you're an engineer, he said, shaking my hand with the careful grip of someone holding a newborn. Among other things, she also says you're the smartest man she knows. She's biased. Maybe, but she's usually right about people. It just sometimes takes her a while to admit it. I laughed. You do know her. Over the next few hours, as Sarah slept and Elizabeth dozed and David fetched ice chips and sandwich supplies, I thought about cycles and patterns, about the roads we build and the bridges we cross. Cedric had been released 6 months ago. According to Elizabeth, he was working as a compliance officer at a small firm in Connecticut, making sure other people didn't make his mistakes. He'd sent a gift when he heard Elizabeth was pregnant, a savings bond for the baby's college fund. She kept it. Forgiveness, she said, was easier when you had something bigger to focus on. The morning sun was streaming through the hospital windows when Elizabeth woke up. Dad, you're still here. Where else would I be? I don't know. At your mysterious office? Reviewing bridge plans? Buying another company? I retired. She sat up so fast she winced. What? Yesterday was my last day with the state. 38 years. Full pension, though I don't exactly need it. But you love that job. I loved what it gave me: purpose, information, camouflage. But I don't need any of those things anymore. I have a different purpose now. I looked down at Sarah, who'd started to fuss in her sleep, which is making sure she grows up knowing exactly where she comes from and that it's nothing to be ashamed of. That her great-grandfather was a construction worker who built half of Brooklyn. That her grandmother was a public school teacher who believed education could change the world. That her mother is a fighter who protects people who can't protect themselves. And that her grandfather is the most patient man in the world, Elizabeth finished. Who taught me that real power comes from being underestimated? Real wealth comes from having choices. And real revenge is living well despite what anyone thinks of you. I was going to say her grandfather is just a retired civil servant who got lucky with some investments. Same thing. David returned with coffee and bagels, and we sat there, this unlikely family, watching the sun climb over Manhattan. Sarah opened her eyes, definitely my wife's eyes, and looked around with the bewildered curiosity of someone seeing the world for the first time. What do you think, little one? I whispered to her. It's a complicated place, but there are roads to everywhere and bridges over the rough spots. And if anyone ever tells you that you're not enough, that where you come from matters more than where you're going, you remember this. Your grandfather was nobody special, just a man who paid attention. And that was enough to build an empire and tear one down. She yawned, unimpressed by my philosophy. Dad, Elizabeth said, there's something I need to tell you. What's that? I finally looked into the trust, the one you set up for me. And it's not 50 million. No, it's 200 million. And it's been earning interest for 10 years. Compound interest is a wonderful thing. Dad, it's not for you, I said. It's for her. And her siblings, if you have them. And their children. Generational wealth, but with conditions. They have to work. Real jobs. Contributing something to the world. The trust just ensures they can do it without fear, without having to compromise their values for a paycheck. Like you never had to. Like I chose not to. There's a difference. Elizabeth was crying now. The hormonal, exhausted tears of new motherhood mixed with something deeper. I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. For the wedding. For choosing Cedric. For being ashamed. Stop, I said gently. That was another life. Another Elizabeth. The woman in this room. The mother of this child. The fighter for the forgotten. That's who you really are. The rest was just a detour. A 10-year detour. Some lessons take time to learn. The important thing is you learn them. Sarah started crying then. The healthy wail of a baby who knows what she needs. Elizabeth took her, settling into the ancient rhythm of motherhood. and I watched my daughter become who she was always meant to be. Later, as I was leaving, Elizabeth called me back. "Dad, will you teach her?" "Teach her what?" "Everything. About the roads and bridges. About reading between the lines. About being invisible when you need to be and visible when it matters. About compound interest and patient revenge and the power of being underestimated. That's a lot to teach. You have time." "We both do." I kissed my granddaughter's forehead, then my daughter's. "Yes," I said. "We have all the time in the world." Walking out of the hospital into the bright October morning, I thought about time and money and the things that really matter. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, Cedric was probably putting on a suit for another day of preventing other people's crimes. Somewhere in Manhattan, the Blackstone Estate's new owners were hosting another ostentatious party. Somewhere in the city, roads were being built and bridges were being crossed, and nobody was paying attention to the engineers who made it all possible. That was fine with me. I'd had my moment of visibility, my grand revelation. Now I could go back to being invisible. Just another grandfather pushing a stroller through the park, teaching a little girl about infrastructure and compound interest and the quiet power of patience. The best revenge, after all, isn't served cold. It's served at exactly the right temperature, at exactly the right moment, to exactly the right people. And then you move on, build something better, and let the world underestimate you all over again. Because that's where the real power lies, not in what people see, but in what they don't see coming until it's too late to stop it. My name is James Mitchell. I was a civil servant for 38 years. I built roads and bridges and stuff, and I won. The end author's note. They say you should write what you know. I know about being invisible. I know about being underestimated. I know about sitting in rooms where people with half your intelligence and twice your arrogance make decisions that affect millions. I know about the quiet rage that builds when someone you love decides you're not enough. But mostly, I know about patience. The kind that waits decades for the perfect moment. The kind that builds empires in shadows and topples them in light. The kind that teaches lessons that can never be unlearned. This story isn't really about revenge. It's about value, how we measure it, how we assign it, how wrong we usually are about it. Cedric thought value came from names and connections and the right zip code. Elizabeth thought it came from transformation, from leaving behind who you were to become who you could be. James knew better. Value comes from understanding how things really work, not how they appear to work, but the actual mechanisms, the boring details everyone else ignores. The person who reads the fine print, the one who pays attention during the meeting everyone else thinks is pointless. The one who sees patterns where others see chaos. In the end, the roads and bridges weren't just metaphors. They were exactly what they appeared to be: infrastructure. The boring, essential foundation that everything else is built on. The things nobody notices until they're gone. Just like the people who built them. Just like the fathers who are told they're not good enough to attend their daughters' weddings. Just like the civil servants who everyone assumes are marking time until retirement. The real tragedy isn't that Cedric underestimated James. It's that Elizabeth did. The real revenge isn't that James destroyed Cedric. It's that he saved Elizabeth from a marriage built on lies, from a life built on pretense, from becoming someone her mother wouldn't recognize. Sometimes the greatest act of love looks like cruelty. Sometimes the best thing a father can do is show his daughter exactly who she's chosen, exactly what she's choosing, exactly what it costs to pretend you're someone you're not. And sometimes, just sometimes, the nobody in the corner is the most powerful person in the room. They just don't know it yet, but they will. Thank you for staying with me and listening this far. Your attention is a gift. Did these minutes mean something to you? Then please, follow the channel. Every click from you is a push that helps me keep bringing stories that truly stay with us.